The Carlos Ghosn affair, power, betrayal, and the mechanics of judicial hostage-taking. Carlos Ghosn's escape from Japan was not merely a personal act of desperation. It was a structural indictment of the state that pursued him. No man who believes he can receive a fair trial abandons the courtroom and vanishes across borders. His flight itself demonstrated that in Japan, a suspect is not tried but broken, not examined but condemned, and not confronted with law but with power. Before his arrest in 2018, Ghosn was a man who reshaped the global automotive industry. He rescued Nissan from bankruptcy, integrated it with Renault and Mitsubishi, and pioneered a transnational model of industrial cooperation. Every business school studied his methods as a rare instance of cross-national corporate success. Yet, every surgical correction produces enemies. In Japan, Ghosn did more than fix a company. He proved that the national corporate elite had failed. A foreigner saving a Japanese icon was not simply an economic event. It was a humiliation written into balance sheets. From that moment, Ghosn ceased to be merely a CEO. He became a reminder that power had been rescued from outside, and that the domestic hierarchy had been exposed as inadequate. What he accomplished made him intolerable. His competence became his crime, and his arrest was the revenge of a wounded corporate aristocracy. The removal of Ghosn was driven by a convergence of three forces: national ego, corporate survival, and state power. His arrest was not an accident of circumstance, but the mechanical outcome of interests that could no longer tolerate his continued dominance. For the Japanese establishment, Ghosn embodied three simultaneous threats. He had shamed them by reviving a company they had run into the ground. He was preparing to formalize a merger that would subordinate Nissan to a foreign headquarters, and he had acquired too much legitimacy, not merely as a foreign expert, but as a ruler in fact. Thus, the justice system became an instrument of corporate revanche and national pride. Ghosn was not arrested for financial misconduct. He was arrested because he succeeded. Japan presents itself as a disciplined, law-bound society, yet its criminal procedure contradicts every principle of modern jurisprudence. A 99% conviction rate, prolonged pre-charge detention, interrogations without counsel, and the systematic pursuit of confession over evidence are not features of due process. They are structural markers of authoritarian adjudication. The system functions purposefully. The accused is not a subject of law, but a subject of discipline. The courtroom is not an arena of argument, but a ceremonial ratification of the state's prerogative to decide who is sacrificed. In practice, this is a medieval justice wrapped in 5G electronics, a feudal ethic of subjugation, camouflaged by modern infrastructure. Imprisonment is not punishment after guilt. It is the mechanism by which guilt is manufactured. The geopolitical dimension cannot be ignored. France, Renault, and the Macron government acted with deliberate calculation. Paris made no meaningful diplomatic move to protect the executive who had delivered billions in value to its national industry. Silence was not an accident. It was a position. France had multiple incentives. Ghosn had grown beyond the control of any single government. A merger threatened to subordinate Renault to him, and leaders who owe their authority to patron networks do not protect individuals who have ceased to be dependent on them. France did not merely fail to defend Ghosn. It benefited from his removal. By allowing Japan to execute the takedown, the French state could later reassert control over Renault without confronting him. Macron's government behaved not as a protector, but as an accomplice through omission. The arrest itself was the endpoint of a coordinated action in which corporate leadership and state authorities acted in tandem. Internal Nissan figures provided the narrative, prosecutors supplied the coercive machinery, and the state conferred legitimacy on what was effectively a boardroom purge executed under the color of law. This was not law enforcement. It was an institutional ambush disguised as justice. Ghosn was seized not because he violated rules, but because he violated hierarchies. Given Japan's hostage justice model, indefinite detention, coerced confession, conviction before trial, remaining in custody would not have been an act of submission to law, but of surrender to a prescripted outcome. In such conditions, escape is not an evasion of justice, but the only available path to avoid a sentence imposed without due process. By fleeing, Ghosn disrupted the narrative architecture that Japan had constructed. A trial would have ended with a manufactured confession and ceremonial conviction. His escape functioned as a de facto verdict on the Japanese judiciary. The courtroom in Japan is not a forum of law, but an execution chamber with paperwork. The affair reveals that Japan is part of a continuum where the appearance of democracy and legality masks the underlying logic of authoritarian control. Historically, this mirrors fascist and totalitarian regimes, where loyalty to the system outweighs individual rights. In modern times, similar patterns exist in ostensibly democratic nations that curtail civil liberties under the guise of security. The Ghosn case demonstrates the fragility of legal protections when national pride, corporate power, and state authority converge. Institutions that hide authoritarian logic beneath a technological or procedural veneer inevitably reproduce abuses as their historical analogs. Efficiency often comes at the cost of human dignity, due process, and truth. Ultimately, the affair of Carlos Ghosn is a prism through which we can observe the interaction of power, institutions, and self-interest on a global scale. It transcends corporate misconduct and judicial procedure. It is a blueprint of how elites coordinate across borders to protect privilege and control narratives. Competence and success alone do not protect individuals from networks of influence that operate above the law. When states, corporations, and governments act in concert, law becomes a tool for maintaining hierarchy rather than dispensing justice. Ghosn's case is not exceptional because he was guilty or innocent. It is exceptional because it exposes how deeply and seamlessly elite power can manipulate legal and institutional systems to eliminate any threat to its supremacy.